Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Welcome to this political leader election webinar. Bienvenue au webinaire Zoom de ce matin. My name is John Wishart, and I'm the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Moncton. This series is a partnership initiative by 6 organizations in the business leadership and economic development space from the province's 3 largest cities. We are presenting this series of 5 political leader webinars in the lead up to the September 14th provincial election. And we hope these presentations, your questions, and the leaders' answers will help inform everyone as voting day nears. Joining the Greater Moncton Chamber in this exercise is the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, the St. John Region Chamber, Ignite Fredericton, Economic Development Greater St. John, and 3Plus Corporation. I would also like to thank the Atlantic Provinces Chamber of Commerce for their support. And speaking of the Atlantic Chamber, I would like to draw everyone's attention to 2 letters that may help frame the discussion. The Atlantic Chamber submitted a letter on behalf of chambers from around Brunswick to the main political parties in this election, outlining election priorities for business and economic recovery. Similarly, 10 organizations that presented the Turning Point virtual conference earlier this year sent a letter on economic growth to the leaders last week. Copies of both of these letters will be posted in the chat of today's webinar, and we hope that our leaders make reference to those priorities in their remarks. So here is how the webinar will unfold. Today's guest speaker will have between 10 and 20 minutes to make some opening remarks to our audience. This will be followed by a moderated Q&A with your questions. Today's moderator will be Krista Ross, the CEO of the Fredericton Chamber. I should note that everyone's microphones are muted, with the exception of our guest speaker, our moderator, myself, and the thanker. Please post your question at any time in the next hour via the chat function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will attempt to pose as many questions as time allows. We will give preference to business or economy related questions. I also will note that today's webinar and the entire series is being recorded and will be posted on each of the chamber websites. So that's enough of the preliminaries. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Premier Blaine Higgs, the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. Premier Higgs, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you, John. Bonjour, mes amis. It is a pleasure for me to be here today, and certainly in talking with the different groups around the province in the business sector. It feels like something that I feel certainly comfortable in discussing, but is part of the reason why I got into politics to begin with. I think to start off, one of the things I'd like to just address is why an election, why now, and it's one of the things I think is most important to our province at this point is stability. It's predictability, and because we don't really know what's going to take place over the coming years in relation to the pandemic, but we can't wait for a vaccine to actually be found. We have to move on within COVID. So what I had tried to do a few weeks ago was basically to emulate what we had achieved through the COVID cabinet group, and what we've seen through this last 6-8 months has kind of been unprecedented focus on our path forward, and that was the health and safety of our citizens. But we also saw it more than just within the political side of it. We saw it across the network, within the civil service, within people working all over the province, being part of that success story. And what I saw from that is people willing, no matter what they were doing it better, and they were feeling a pride in New Brunswick. So what I've seen in a shift over the last several years has been basically a renewed belief in New Brunswick. And that a lot was heightened over the past 6 months. One of the things that drove me from the very beginning were these I guess, you get negative stories nationally that, well, whatever's going on in New Brunswick, do the opposite. Well, I don't care much for that sort of outside public relations. And I feel like right now people are looking at us and saying, wow, what's going on in New Brunswick? How do we maximize and capitalize on that renewed belief that's real in our province? So then when we set up several discussions, as you know, 3 weeks ago with the other leaders, and the basis was, let's focus on some big items. Let's get stability so we can look at beyond the pandemic or the end of the mandate or till the pandemic ends. so we don't have to be concerned. People don't have to be concerned there would be any particular election call through an issue of the day. And let's start focusing on big items. Let's focus on an economic recovery plan, not one that changes with every election, but one that actually has a 10, 15, 20-year vision on how we sustain growth and develop growth in regions around the province. We've all seen the political distribution model and how there is a fundamental belief that, well, if we just spend more dollars, growth will follow. Well, spending more dollars on short-term projects that don't develop a long-term sustainability for our community, it certainly has not proven to bring any long-lasting value. But can we get away from the political volatility every time there's an election? And to me, that is what's been our single biggest barrier, is that tremendous shift in what success means and what it doesn't mean. So for me, success is something you measure. Success is something that you feel, something that people comment on, people look at us in a favorable way. But in terms of what you measure, for me, it was like early on looking at, let's say as an example, our budget and our performance in the civil service. So we had what was always been known as quarterly reports from the government, but all they were is best guess till the year end. And I remember when I was last in the finance role, I said in 14, it was like, we need to have a budget versus actual performance. So we know every month by month what we're doing in every department. Are we meeting these objectives? Nothing that's any different than what you do every day in your business. So guess what? And when I came back in 2018, it had never been developed, and it was within months of being developed. Well, it's developed now, and it was working within the first quarter, and we now know exactly what we are, where we are. And that's why we know precisely where we are right today after this COVID experience over the last 6 months. We had a negative $600 million swing, but we have not changed our spending and our plans to spend where we need to spend money at all. We're on the same budget as we were on back in March. And that's why the platform has been all laid out based on actual what the needs are in terms of different categories or different departments. And that's why we adopted way back at the beginning, the growth strategy for economic viability in our province and sustainability. So the election was about, we couldn't get agreement 3 weeks ago to look at the big picture and have a common path forward that we would develop together. So for me, it's like, do we wait for 2 years in COVID or do we actually get on with it? And I want to make something happen here. I think we have an opportunity in our province. We also changed the focus of ONB when we talk about growth. What did we learn from COVID? We learned that, we're doing a lot of things differently. Not only in government did we tear the walls down between departments and move good people into different categories to help us. We focused on health in that case, but now ONB's focused on like the Navigator program and how do we work with businesses to help them expand their capabilities? How do we grow their marketplace? How do we tie into new markets? How do we get them online? And also in New Brunswick, how do we it's not acceptable for me to see that we're losing 50% of the contracts. Like when our tenders go out, New Brunswick companies were losing about 50%. Where now New Brunswick companies are winning 80% of our contracts. And all that is looking at what our New Brunswick companies have to offer. It wasn't rocket science, but then I hear companies saying, I can do work in this province, but I can't do work in New Brunswick because our specs are different. Or we were putting big projects together that companies couldn't compete with because of the bonding requirements, and then it meant that many weren't able to participate. So I've been very focused with ONB, basically be the way to remove the barriers. Take out the headwinds in terms of what is preventing a company from succeeding, or the bureaucracy that prevents them from getting through the issues in our civil service or within government. Through my former work life, we had several sayings that one was like, service means everything, or customer's always right. I look at every taxpayer in the province, whether it be a particular business or whether it be a particular individual, as a taxpayer, a customer, and we are in the business of providing service. So I was excited where our budget was going last March. Obviously, it didn't hold up real well with the COVID hitting. But everything we plan to do in that budget is now what we're doing through this campaign. We're not inventing new things. We're basically saying we're on a path, we're staying on the path. It is showing. Our province is starting up faster than, any other province. I think us and PEI are in a similar state. But across the country, we're seeing the results that are showing us as leading the way in that regard. And I think it's because we have confidence in what New Brunswick has to offer and confidence in what our capabilities have, can be. So for me, it's about how do we continue that momentum? And having this election at this time was all about, let's not lose the momentum. Let's not lose the focus on where we're going in this province. And let's listen to people that know more than we do about what they need to help their business survive and thrive and move forward. I have feel as a premier, it's, someone asked me one time, what's it like to be premier? And I said, well, it's another job. And I've had a few over my career, but I feel more like a facilitator than what one might feel as a premier. Many times premiers come in and they think they have all the answers. I've never felt that way, but I've always, and in my entire career, it was always, how do I work with people to get results? I have never seen a time when our civil service have been more engaged. I've never seen a time when we've had as much positivity in our province, and I've been traveling all over about how we feel, about how we've performed, but we did all that together. And I'm looking for the opportunity to keep that ball rolling, but then I'm looking for the connection to every business, every community. How do we raise the region? We invested in infrastructure in relation to the ports. We've seen, we invested in Beldoon to have a northern port for our province that could be an economic generator. We've invested in the Port of St. John, and the recent announcement from CP will be a game changer for the port in St. John, but it'll be a game changer from competitive rates in our province for rail service, which we've certainly had trouble, and that's been lacking for several years. So I'm excited about those changes that are going to be fundamental to reaching world markets with goods and supplies out of New Brunswick. So I'm interested to get into a discussion that is meaningful to all the participants here today, because I am all about results. We've thrown a lot of money all around at governments over the past, and I'm interested in spending for results. I'm interested in building for New Brunswick. Building and utilizing infrastructure like you would in business. I mean, I see many buildings that don't have good utilization, and you wouldn't build that. You wouldn't do that in government or in business, but we see it in government all the time, because we think, oh, well, we'll just cause another project and we'll spend money and we'll build it and people will be employed and it's going to increase the GDP. Well, we know that is short-term gain for long-term pain. And so I am not interested in a short-term strategy on economic growth for our province. I'm interested in a long-term viability for regions throughout our province, and regions that develop on their own merit with programs that work in government, an environment that works. And it's not just setting up competition between one region or another. It's actually building on strengths of a region. So I'm excited about that, but my goal is to engage people throughout this province to make a difference, and a difference that's sustainable. So one government or another can't just throw it out. They're actually on a path that's well developed by individuals that are a whole lot smarter than the politicians in Fredericton. And I think I'll stop right there.
Thanks very much, Premier Higgs. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and to share information with us. I'm going to be moderating some questions today. I'll introduce myself, Krista Ross, CEO at the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce. And we very much appreciate having the opportunity to co-host this series with the St. John and Moncton Chambers, as well as the economic development agencies in our three communities, Ignite, St. John, Economic Development, Greater St. John, and 3+ in Moncton. So I'm going to start today with a question that's posed in our chat, that was posed in our first Zoom series this morning. And the New Brunswick Real Estate Association is asking, as an association, they're seeking an answer from each of the parties on the following. How will your party address deficiencies and unfair aspects of the current property tax regime and local government structure in our province?
So we had in our budget previously to address the taxation model, basically in the one sense, the double tax, and looking at how we gradually phase that out. With the COVID situation, we did have to defer that, at least for this year. I'd like to think we could put it in place next year, but it'll depend on how our province actually starts up, because I've committed to no new taxes in the province. I think we're definitely taxed high enough, and I would like to get back on that program. Having said that, the other models of tax reform, municipal tax reform, I think there's a real need to have more money into regions and let the regions have the capability to decide where they put dollars for sustainability and growth. I have said many times, what does a region look like? What should it look like? How many regions should we have? I was given with other leaders a presentation back the 3 weeks ago, and it was showing how our province is broken up in several different categories. We have our regional, our economic regions, like regional service areas, have 12 of those. We have the health authorities, we have 7 of those. We have 300 LSDs or something of that nature between LSDs and municipalities. And we really have quite a wide range of, okay, what's a region? For me, it was understanding what should every region have for amenities that would allow it to be successful and progress in a way that people say, well, I would like to live there. It has, it has the right range, it has the right school system, it has the hospitals. And so it's how do we start that as a program? What should a region be? How should it look to attract people to live there so there's not disadvantages to move from one area to another? And then what are the priorities that are developed through a greater tax base that is based out of the region in terms of less control from Fredericton, more control from a region? The political distribution model has only worked to provide a vote buying scheme. It hasn't worked for the regional development. We've seen it fail, particularly through the northern areas. And I think that's got to change.
Thank you for that. During the Rogers Leaders Debate, you mentioned small modular nuclear reactors. And NB Power's public figures in their 2017 Integrated Resource Plan show that SMRs might be more costly as measured by levelized cost of energy than renewables. Tell us about why you're supporting nuclear energy.
The reality is that this is looked at as a world kind of opportunity for clean energy supply. In New Brunswick, yes, we could possibly in New Brunswick be able to do wind and solar and hydro and tidal, which tidal still should be an option for us to look at as well. And we could manage that here. But in relation to small nuclear reactors and the world energy demand, currently there isn't anything available that would meet the thirst of world energy supply. And so here we have a big opportunity in New Brunswick. We have a nuclear capability. We have a permitted site. We have the actual expertise to develop this. And we've signed MOUs with other provinces because in the conversations I've had with the federal government, we actually need a pan-Canadian approach. The federal government are looking at this like they did the CANDU reactors years ago, but the new technology actually allows the utilization, the MOTEX technology allows the utilization of spent fuel. So it'll solve one of the environmental issues that are currently have from the CANDU technology, and they're portable. They're easily transported. And when I'm talking about the new transmission capabilities we have or transshipment capabilities we have, coming with CP coming into the province with more capability for shipping and bigger ships coming, we could export anywhere in the world. This could be a clean energy solution coming right out of New Brunswick that goes anywhere in the world. And that's what's exciting. It's the big picture. Yeah, we can look small and we can look in our own little backyard and say, yeah, I can keep the lights on with wind blowing. But we can look big and say, we can keep the lights on in major cities in the country, in the world, because of a technology that we build right here. And we have committed resources to this. I have worked with the federal government for a resource commitment to this, and it's there. It's something that we're not announcing during an election, but it's there, and it's the next phase of developing this technology, because it's not tomorrow. It's 7 to 10 years. But again, it's looking at the strategy for growth in our province over the long haul. And this type of project would provide work for people, contractors and individuals all over the province. It's just an opportunity for us not to stagnate, but look at the big picture.
We have a number of questions in our chat today related to tourism and hospitality. One of them is suggesting that it will likely get worse as we enter the slow season, and another one comments about patios closing down soon. The current structure of CEWS, the wage subsidy, will reduce subsidies, and unless the business picks up significantly, may result in another round of layoffs. What's the proactive plan to protect these small businesses and the people employed in these industries?
So recognizing that the industries hit the hardest were service industries and combination industries, we put in the 20% rebate to get people moving in our province. And that has seemed to have been very effective. And we've heard good things about that, people moving around. And also heard good things about people understanding all of a sudden, wow, we didn't know we could do this in New Brunswick, or we didn't know we had that here. We extended that to March 31st because we wanted to keep that recognizing that is going to be a big challenge. O&B are set up with a, there are programs we have in place. O&B are set up with the Navigator program, and it's to work with individual companies and understand their particular situation. I just need to, I think, caution in the sense that we want people to survive. Obviously, we want our business to survive. We want to do it in the sense that we can maintain the taxation model that we have, because anything I spend is coming right around back at you in many ways. So how do we manage that? So we work with individual companies. What do they precisely need? Not only just to survive this little situation, a big situation, I guess I should say, but also to grow beyond it. So how do maybe we have some bumps right now, and maybe, we just can't supply for everybody, but we see them get through it. And then we see the ability to expand. I think on the tourism side of it, I think we got people, and I'm seeing that now, who want to come to New Brunswick. The only reason they're not is because we've got the borders closed. So what's going to change there in the coming months? Are we going to be able to open borders before the fall season? I guess that depends on how things start up with schools, how things start up within universities and post-secondary institutions. And if things stay stable, I would like to think we'll recover some activity in the province for the fall color season.
We have a question today from the New Brunswick Medical Society, and they want to know how the PC party will invest in healthcare if you're reelected.
Interestingly enough, there are things we learned through COVID that people would have said for years couldn't be done. And one of those things would be like virtual care. I think we're doing 85% of our primary care, appointments now online. And I think that's been tried to be done for 25 years. And certainly in the last 10 or 15, and didn't happen. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, in the time of an emergency, you find a way to do this. So there were many things that you say you don't waste the innovation that comes out of a serious situation or a pandemic in this case. So we saw that online as an opportunity, an innovation that really made a difference. We were able to move seniors out of hospitals. We saw that to put in better senior care, and we moved about 182, and we did it in record time, and that's been talked about for years and years. We have put the nurse practitioners in 3 different areas in the major cities at this point, but where the demand is. I mean, they could move anywhere in the province, but it's where the demand is right now. To offset some of the load on family doctors. We also, we talk about how do we manage better healthcare throughout the province. Pharmacists, how do we utilize pharmacists? A few days ago, we talked about, some of the routine items that can take the load off of family physicians, and how do we make that work so that pharmacists can do more in the local communities. I think the time to look at innovative ways to change, it's important. I read an article from the Medical Society, or they put out a request, said we need to hire 300 more doctors. Every province in the country is trying to hire more doctors. And the reality is, in this past year, I could give you a partial story here, but I always tell the full story. The partial story would be we've hired 94 doctors in the province in the last year, about 15 months. The whole story would be we've lost 104. So we're down a negative 10. And that's because of retirement, it's because some people left, it's a multitude of things. But the reality is, I think in Ontario, they're looking for 250,000 employees, and a good portion of those are in the healthcare sector. We are not going to be able to compete or get enough resources in people to meet the 120,000 people that we're going to need over the next 10 years. So what do? We find better ways to utilize what we have, while at the same time trying to grow our population, trying to bring in more immigrants, trying to find more sources of people, but we do all the above. Because just saying we can do what we do and we'll be good isn't going to do it. In our hospitals, when we talked about how do we manage the hospitals, we have 30% still of our senior care in our hospitals, 30, 40%. And we can say, okay, well, we need to get them all up to nursing homes. Well, the reality is that would be great. But we don't have the nursing homes and we don't have the people to staff them if we did. So how do we utilize these facilities that we have to make it a better home care model while they're there? How do we provide better care within the hospital structures we have with the staff we already have? It's a balance of saying, people not looking at something and say, well, I just can't do that. Well, we got to find a way to do it. So unfortunately, on the healthcare reform thing, it kind of all went sideways because we didn't have good communications with the community about what our problems are. And I made it pretty clear, we're not shutting down ERs. I guess, you kind of know where you can go and you can't go. And so we're not doing that. But the idea of how to utilize our facilities better is what's needed in our province. And I, from this COVID experience, I believe people are ready to help us get there.
You mentioned immigration in the answer to the health question, and there's a question in our chat about, do you have a plan to open family sponsorship immigration programs to reunite families living in New Brunswick?
Yes, we would like to look at that as a possibility. We've also looked at working the federal government to have more flexibility in temporary foreign workers and families coming. So we bring them at the very beginning to come and stay and work here. We've seen companies that are doing that today. I mean, I think certainly in Chipman, Groupe Savoir and Saint-Quentin, we've seen it in St. George. We've seen that they're looking at, they're moving people in and coming into the community. And that's an interesting dynamic too, because if you think of some of these communities in the past and how the different attitudes, it's really unique how New Brunswick are embracing now the immigration policies and the need to have new people join us and the diversity that we're welcoming in our province. It's going to be the solution in many ways to problems around the world where people are suffering, but in problems we have where we just don't have enough people. So I'm open to any of these suggestions as we get people to come and stay and live and work and raise their family. It is our opportunity.
I guess to add to that, Federal Minister Mendocino has suggested a new pilot for Atlantic Canada that would allow municipalities the opportunity through their economic development agencies, and I believe chambers of commerce are included in that as well, to work directly with population growth for municipal attraction. Is this something that your government would work with? And I guess perhaps given that New Brunswick is sometimes looked as a springboard because of the refundable deposit program, how do you feel about this municipal attraction type program?
So I think that in many ways, and that's why when municipalities put out, kind of their priorities, we had the 8 cities put out what their priorities were for improvements and giving them the ability to manage their cities. I think I would follow the tracks that municipalities feel are important to them. So in certainly this for attraction to people that are needed, what they see, for me, it becomes a balance in terms of allowing that activity to be able to be coordinated across the province, but to work with municipalities directly, I guess in a nutshell, for attraction of the right skill sets to help them manage their facilities, if I understand the question right. So that would be perfect. I feel we need more decentralization in that sense, from Fredericton into communities that know what they need. And then we have the funding model that they set the priorities, because I see the money that flows out into communities and I see it coming out for multiple reasons. But then I say, are these all priorities, or are we hitting the mark to get the results we want? And we all need to be in a position where priorities have to matter. And we can't be everything to everyone, but we have to make sure that we're managing to meet the needs that are most pressing. And municipalities are going to know that better than home office.
Another question in our chat today is, what support, resources, and solutions will you offer to ensure the recovery and future growth of the arts sector?
Well, we had in our budget this past year, which we continue to, and I forget the precise amount, but we raised significantly their contributions to the artistic community, because the cultural aspect of New Brunswick is something that we are now seeing, as certainly as we promoted the tourism side of New Brunswick. We also have a cultural tourism program that is set up. So we're seeing that the benefits of people understanding where we came from and how we developed. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement is an example of I think something that is long overdue, but we've met with the community. We had met with the Black community in St. John, particularly months ago, and about the history in New Brunswick. of where the Black community has been such an instrumental part of it. So that can move to the Indigenous communities, obviously to the Acadian culture, and obviously through different nationalities that have grown our province. So I think there's a sector there on the artistic side or cultural tourism, and we did increase funding for that because we recognize the importance.
I have a question here from our friends at Ignite Fredericton. Mr. Premier, until the current interval, New Brunswick has had a comprehensive innovation agenda, one that integrates into a coordinated economic development strategy. What is your government's strategy and investment plans with respect to innovation, research, and development?
So when I talk about priorities, I would put this in that category. You know, we should be spending roughly 2% of our GDP in our budget in relation to innovation and research and development across the province. But what we have a tendency to do is water it down to a point, and we don't typically have that much. I think we're probably more in line at 1%. We water it down to a point where we don't have maybe the results we could get if we decided, okay, what are the top, maybe the top 5 research categories, and I wouldn't be the one to pick them. It would be some panel, and maybe through different chamber groups, the universities. But let's pick projects that we can really focus on with the right resources to ensure success. I have seen us do this over the years politically, where we just got to throw money everywhere and say, oh, we put money there and somewhere else. But at the end of the day, not enough to really make a difference. So it's like, how do we land on what has the highest probability of success? Where can we have our niche opportunity for growth? And let's get the right resources to make it happen. And again, everything for me is about how do we get priorities for results? And then we fund it in a way that, wow, we're going to make move. Then we go to the next one and the next one. Not doing everything at once, but doing it in a way that we see success.
Speaking of opportunities, last week, Organogram presented their recommendations to help support the cannabis sector in New Brunswick, one of which was the creation of a research hub in Moncton on medical cannabis. What's your position on this?
Well, I haven't looked at that particular proposal as such, but again, I would say I think that's a big area for us to expand the growth, and in that sense through the private sector. I would be supportive, but I don't know enough about their proposal. But I would think that certainly it makes sense, and I'd like to see companies growing, and this is a big field that has proven through COVID. I mean, we've seen quite a change in our business here in Cannabis NB. But I think on the medical side, there's even a more enhanced opportunity that we can be suppliers, not only for New Brunswick, but beyond. So it's good to see them proposing expansion. Well,
I'm sure if you haven't had a chance to see that, it will probably be on your desk before the end of the day, having this morning.
Okay, very good.
In New Brunswick, one of our participants today says, in New Brunswick, close to 50% of our adult population have only adequate literacy skills, preventing them to fill basic jobs if they are able to find employment. Although the government focus seems to be on early childhood education, and that's absolutely necessary for the future, and on immigration and attraction of skilled workers, but we do have potential to develop people into a more skilled workforce. What plans are there to offer and support programs which offer these types of training?
So earlier this week, or late last week, we did put a program together about training in terms of literacy, in terms of education with adults. And so having more access to that, because I realize that is a challenge. It's a challenge for newcomers too. I mean, and in some cases, you know, I know of new immigrants that have been in the country for 3 or 4 years and still couldn't pass the qualification exams for be English or French. Yeah. And so you kind of say, well, how could you survive? And in this case, one employer actually was saying to me, this gentleman was driving a truck for him. He says he's a great employee, does everything, he's super, and I hate to lose him, but I may lose him because he can't pass the English exam. And he didn't want him to go at all. So you kind of wonder, if you can do the job well, are our exams suited to what we actually need? But we know there's a challenge in adult literacy, but we also know that our education system has not been allowed to be consistent and has not been meeting the standards that we need for graduates. And whether that be in many categories, whether that be our ability to speak both official languages, or whether to just have a greater capability in actual literacy results. So I think for me, It becomes down to consistency of approach, recognizing what works and what doesn't work, and not being afraid to make the changes to something that can work. We often don't change anything for the fear of change. I always had this little model that work is fun and change is good. Now, change is good if it's recognizing an opportunity that is not working and fixing it. It's not good if it's changed just because a new government comes into play and thinks, well, I can't do that because the last one did it. So we have got to focus on adult literacy, and with certainly more immigrants, more immigration required, it has to be even a stronger focus, and it's not lost on us.
I remember you talking about work is fun and change is good at the State of the Province this year.
That's right. Not everyone subscribes to that, but if you get used to that philosophy, you're just looking to change and improve.
So this next question actually talks about change. The St. John Chamber has asked, in the past few years, we've seen numerous versions of our Economic Development Agency. Each time the government changes, we reinvent the wheel and move everything around. How do you plan to stabilize this critical component?
Well, I don't think me being chair of regional development in St. John is going to change that necessarily, but I do see the economic region for the first time in many, many years becoming a body to look at the region as a whole. I grew up in the Valley and worked in my entire career in the city, and I believe that we have a role to play in the community for regional support. I see other communities work better in that regard than some, and we've been, let's say, separate identities for some time, it seems, in the St. John region. So most recently, in the last 6 months, there's an economic development group that's put together that represents that region. So I think there's where the voice needs to come from of how we develop that, and whether it's in tax reform, whether it's an industrial tax base, is it fair and reasonable, and make sure that it is, because we're not looking for tax breaks, we're looking for fairness. And so I think that is good to see happening in St. John. Excuse me. I think it's stronger in other regions. I think it's strong. We see that, I think, in the Fredericton areas being stronger. So I could go around. I think Moncton Dieppe and Riverview have worked collectively as a team. And I could go up north, and the economic development team is working now and trying to recover from the big changes that have happened in the northern regions over the last 10 years or longer. So I guess my voice needs to emulate what regional voices are for priorities. And then we start moving in a direction. I committed to regional reform, looking at municipal reform topics in St. John by 2022. I've committed to that around the province, but I don't know what the definition should be. I see many shortcomings in how we actually connect with the regions, how we support priorities as government, not inventing them, but actually supporting what regions feel are important. The taxation model I mentioned earlier. I just see the potential for us to be more, let's say, decentralized, and as I said earlier, and a greater focus on the economic reform models that work for communities.
We have a question here from Mayor Mike O'Brien, Mayor of the City of Fredericton, and I know that this is a question that's important to all the cities and municipalities. Our city and the business community, especially those in our downtown and BIAs, are very concerned with the impact on our streets of mental health addictions and homelessness. The first two issues, mental health and addictions, lead to the final one, homelessness. How will your government work with the federal government to not only implement immediate programs to address the lack of subsidized rentals and housing, but also long-term holistic programs to address mental health and addictions?
So right out of the gate, we addressed a program around mental health. And how did we kind of get to that point? It was because of working with professionals in any of the municipalities about the timeliness of response. So mental health situations, could develop for many reasons, but certainly one area is that if you don't respond quickly, then it can get deeper very fast. And we were told someone needs to be there in the end of the line, like the 911 when that individual's in a problem, they need someone to talk to. We've seen the tragic incidents that happened in the northern part of the province over the past several months, and we've seen the response. How do we improve the response as a crisis response. So we have maybe a layered response in that. We're doing pilot projects on that in St. John, and we're working with Indigenous communities in the province in relation to having a response mechanism that works. We're also addressing the enforcement side of it. We announced a week ago or so, working with the RCMP. They said that over half of their weapons-related crimes are related directly to crystal meth, a drug that is so prevalent on our streets, so cheap and easy to access, that our young families, our young kids, our communities are being disrupted dramatically because of it. So it's a balanced approach in relation to the mental health quick hit and working with individuals, to the crisis management to manage the situation that people are in at the time and in a crisis because of addiction. The issues in our hospitals, where we're seeing healthcare professionals fearing for people coming into ERs in the middle of the night and aggressive behavior, and then the drug enforcement to try to get drugs off the street. On the homeless side, we recognize, and we're part of a federal program that's going to see, I think it's like 5,100 new homes or renovated homes in the system in the next year or 2 years. It's a timeline. I just forget exactly the timeline, but it's recognizing the criticality of that. But something that is coming right now, and I've really just learned about it in the last few weeks of traveling around the province, you know, with a real estate kind of boom in some ways, where we're seeing more interest in real estate renovations, rents are going up. And I've had people come to me and say, you know, my rent just went up $250. And I don't know that I can afford that, and I've got a problem. So rents have been pretty stable for a long time, and now we're seeing a cycle where that's going to change. So it's likely going to pose new problems, that'll require new solutions. But we have a path. There's $62 million that we're working with the federal government for homelessness and shelters, and that's a program that's in place, and we laid out the details of that a few days ago.
The next question is around natural resource development. What do you believe are the most important natural resource projects for growing the New Brunswick economy, and how can government help move them forward?
So there's a balance here between the sustainability of our current industries that have such a big impact on our province, and I speak specifically of forestry. You know, it's easy to jump on kind of the anti-spray program and be in a political campaign, but I don't do any of this in absence of understanding the details and understanding the facts. So, you know, whether it's a political movement or whether it's an emotional movement, it's based on the facts for me. It's just how I think. I guess that's part of being an engineer, you know, that maybe that's a shortcoming, I'm not sure. But for me, I like to understand the details. We have an all-party committee we put in place a year ago to look at all of the issues around glyphosate spraying. And that'll tell us whether we need to make changes or not. We also recognize that public health, Canada Public Health are not seeing any concerns, and they have not restricted its use in that sense. We know that there are opportunities around rivers, there's opportunities around communities that we can just maybe be better stewards of in the province and restrict that, because getting in the water, we know that's an issue. But the other thing that I don't think many people know is that spraying of forestry lands is about 6% of the total, let's say, of forests in the province in any given year. But the larger use, 80% of these chemicals are used on farmlands. So, I mean, there's a huge impact here. So you need to understand what it means technically and base facts on science. So then you move from forestry into salmon farming, which is another stable industry here for us. And we know there's more pressure to move on shore for this. So we need to evolve with that over time, but let the industry evolve in a way that they will sustainably. Certainly as we transition in other industries around, let's say, the typical refining, which was, you know, where I came from, there hasn't been a lot of move on shale gas development in the province or at this time. I'd like to think we can have a balance here going forward with wind, solar, and tidal. And, you know, is there a future for gas development? I don't know at this stage if there is, but if we can reduce fossil fuels, it's a transition economy, and I've always said that. But let's balance this out, and let's not lose what we have here in our province. But I again like to map out our path on carbon emissions because we know where we're going. We know we can be there and meet our targets, and we can continue to evolve. The carbon tax will be used for new projects, be used for environmental protection, like for flooding concerns or natural disasters, as well as innovative research on new project development. So I think it's a balance. I guess my point is this. I don't believe shut the lights off and wander around the dark until we find something else. I believe we transition in a process that's real, keeps our economy flowing, and we're able to manage it on a go-forward basis. I am very concerned federally of our transfer situation over the coming years because the Alberta economy is collapsed. I believe we should be utilizing our resources while we can, whether it be New Brunswick or whether it be elsewhere. But with the economy collapse in Alberta, with the lack of federal revenues coming in, I don't know what that means to our economy going forward. With our transfer payment situation here, about 30+%. I was very focused on getting value for every dollar, federal dollar, and really building projects that we needed, like if it's bridge repair, school repair, hospitals, whatever, the things we needed, because I don't know where transfer payments are going next year, and I want to defer costs so I don't have to be in a position that all of a sudden I'm left holding the bag. I mean, maybe it won't be me left holding the bag. I guess I'll know in a week. But it would be a case where we have a plan to manage through this, COVID or not, and we are weathering the storm. We were able to weather the storm better right now because we had a plan back in March, and we had a surplus budget that allowed us to take a $600 million swing and only impact us $300 million because we had that kind of $300 million with the surplus, paying down the debt, which we had to defer, but it gave us a bit of a cushion.
Speaking of projects, you've stated that decisions like maritime iron should be left to NB Power. Our chambers have advocated together that the government should take a broader perspective that contemplates all of the economic development aspects of the projects. What are your thoughts on the relationship between the utilities and sort of whole of government decision-making?
Well, I think that utilities have to have a position to make a calculated decision that they can defend. Like we should be able to see that as taxpayers and say, okay, why would this decision be made? Because it could be such a big win, certainly for the northern region, but globally for the province. And I was a very big proponent early on if this could work, but we need a global emission reduction standard that would be acceptable to New Brunswick, or to the federal government, because it definitely would have an increase in global emissions here in New Brunswick. So, but I couldn't get that approval from Ottawa. I couldn't get them to buy into that. So I do think we need to think broader than just New Brunswick and just Canada as we're solving, like talking with the SMRs. But in that project, so going back to the utilities, you know, NB Power has a $5 billion debt. And much of that debt has been related to poor political decisions that influenced their decision-making over the last number of years. And you could go back to one project after another and you could say, well, would we've ever done this? Would we've done this? Well, no, as a utility left to their own devices, there wouldn't have been a business case to do it. So in this particular situation, it amounts to about roughly 300 million that would have to be invested by the province. And then a roughly 10% increase on our overall power rates across the province to cause this project to be viable. So it is not a standalone project. It is and right today, it wouldn't be accepted on the environmental ticket alone, but it isn't viable on the economic ticket. So it comes down to, if you were in business, would you invest in this project? Now, maybe chambers across the province would say, we'll put money into this. Maybe that'll make a difference. But as taxpayers, would I sign up the people of the province for another 10% increase and a $300 million expense? I don't think I could do that.
One of our guests today in the chat has asked why New Brunswick seems to have an issue retaining some of the high-skilled bilingual workers, and wants to know your perspective on that.
Well, do we have that issue in retaining bilingual workers in our province? I mean, I think people are looking to us now as being a place for them to actually be able to be fully bilingual, work in a bilingual province, the only one. And it can be a natural asset for us. So we are having problems retaining workers. I think that's changing, actually. I think the attitudes are improving. But that may be my opinion, but I see that. I think we're seeing that people should not, with the amount of jobs we have in our province, we shouldn't be losing anyone. And that's why, I've said many times that we need to have higher standards in our schools. We need to have students graduating that can speak both official languages, at least in a conversational style when they graduate, so we can communicate. But we shouldn't be losing any graduates from our province, whether it's because of bilingual, they feel they have to go elsewhere, or whether they're unilingual, they have to go elsewhere. We need them all. And if we can train immigrants to come in and work in our province and speak one official language or the other, surely we'll be able to retain our own students to stay here. And I say of late, over the last 4 or 6 months, I knew of young families, or I've known young families that are coming back, looking at New Brunswick. I find that very exciting. To me, that's the reward, is seeing people look at New Brunswick once again for the first time. And for me, that's what it's all about. Seeing the civil service get engaged in delivering a better service. And I've seen that internally. People are referenced that they work for G&B now, not necessarily a department or another. They're just basically saying we're part of the success. I quoted a letter the other day. I'm wandering here a bit, but it was from an MB Liquor employer. And Labor Day, yesterday, I actually referenced it. And the individual was a 40-year employee. And he said, I'm just writing to say thank you. But he said, I just wanted to say, I felt we did our part here at MB Liquor. And he said, I wasn't, we don't often get a shout out, but we stayed open when others were staying home and being paid for it. He said, we served our customers. They weren't always happy being out and around, and they were upset and irate. But we were a team that felt, I'm working for the province to keep us moving. I'm not just working for MB Liquor. And the gentleman took the time to write that to me, and I quoted it yesterday in a release, because to me, it was an example of what I'm seeing. People are looking at their jobs. It doesn't matter what they are, just doing it a little bit differently, a little bit better, a little better attitude, because they're helping New Brunswick succeed.
Premier Higgs, we have just a few more moments, and I have 2 questions, quick ones that I want to squeeze in, and then we'll let you have the last word, and then we'll have a closing remark from the St. John Chamber. So one of the last 2 questions is, what opportunities do you see to cooperate collaboratively with the other Atlantic provinces, and can we better use our collective resource amongst the 4 provinces?
Yes, we can. I have certainly, we did that working with COVID. Again, was an example of us making joint decisions. I mean, our Atlantic bubble was a joint effort. Our restrictions that we put in place, we worked together on. There is a competitiveness that exists, particularly, I would say, between us and Nova Scotia, that can be a deterrent in how we focus on each other's all rising together. It doesn't seem like there's been much traction, with your intergovernmental affairs over the years, and there's been identification of some opportunities, but it hasn't really been, I would say, a lot of success or significant success. I think the areas that we can focus on quickly are areas of certification, with our training requirements, so that we don't have that differential. That applies to, with Quebec, because I've talked about the different certification of trades that Quebec has requirements that doesn't exist in New Brunswick. It can have a perspective on some of the bidding that we do and the work that we share between us and other provinces, or with Nova Scotia and with other Atlantic provinces. It can be the voice. I would say one of the biggest areas that we can work as collectively is, regardless of who's actually in government in the respective Atlantic provinces, we speak as one voice going to Ottawa. And we did that through COVID. So there were 2 Liberal premiers and two PC premiers, but we spoke as one. When we would go to the forums and on our calls weekly or the meetings prior, we were speaking more as one. I think that's where our strength can be. And when we look at our economy, it has to be how we complement each other and not be in competition. And one of the things that is a problem, I would say, significant problem, people will say, well, why does the government give money to a IBM or to some big corporation? And the reason is because our competitors do. And so it's like, if we're trying to land something here long-term in the province and have an established investment, then if we don't do it, Nova Scotia will do it. And really, neither one of us should be doing it. So there's kind of a level playing field, that if we could get a curriculum there that says, look, we're both eating our own lunch here, let's try to find a process for development. It would be very helpful, and it would set up where we win a bid based on our strengths and our capabilities. And being a bilingual province is one of those categories that nobody else offers. So that's just one example, but it allows us to differentiate, and there are other differentiating tools. But when we get kind of unequally bought out, that becomes an issue.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and as I said, I have one last question. Then I would invite you to take that question and follow up with your closing remarks, and then I'll be inviting the St. John Chamber to close our event today. So my last question is, what is your commitment to having a business lens on decisions that are made and looking at how policy decisions that are made will impact the business community?
That's easy. That is me. I mean, I came from a business world. I survived 33 years, and many times people would say, "You worked 33 years at Reunite." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I should have gotten the bumper sticker." I survived 33 years. Every day was a challenge. Every day was, are we meeting our objectives? Are we exceeding our objectives? Are we getting better at how we measure performance? Are we meeting the standards of our customers? So for me, my whole goal here in getting in office was, can we make better decisions? Well, how do you make better decisions? With better facts, with better information. Will we deal with the big issues? Absolutely. In fact, in many ways, that's what keeps me going, is let's get into this and let's figure it out and not ignore it. Can we get people engaged to be part of the solution? And that's why I'm excited about right now, this point in history for New Brunswick, is people are looking favorably at New Brunswick. People are looking at, wow, I didn't know you could do all this in New Brunswick, in seeing what we have to offer. And when we start pushing our people in the civil service, it's because they've taken a non-risk approach to everything. So they'll put in a contract that, oh, well, there's, life is a risk. And we need to work with people that are going to be part of investing and living here in New Brunswick to meet our needs. My goal was to build an organization, a foundation that'll go beyond whatever party shows up next. And even if one shows up next week, although I don't think I'm quite there yet with the foundation, and that's why I'm still at this. We have wonderful people throughout our province that are dedicated to our province. We have people that have worked and go the extra mile, but they got to feel appreciated. They got to feel they're part of a solution, and they've got to be listened to. And I feel that organization is just starting to percolate. We're just starting to develop that. And I'm seeing that throughout the civil service. And I want people to see that when they go to Service NB. Now, I know they're not all smiling there just yet. Lineups are long, so we got to work on that. But the idea is that people go in, and the greatest thing, I'm going to leave with this little example. I got a call from a business, they've been into WorkSafe, and they were looking for ways to set up, and with the COVID and all the things of how they were going to manage to keep their business open. And they particularly referenced this lady that worked at WorkSafe. And they said, she was amazing. She just gave us all the information we need. She helped us work through all the details. Just amazing. So someone had taken the time that had a business to tell me that. So I called the lady and I said, I just want to thank you. And she said, what? I said, well, here, and I told her the story. And she said, I was just doing my job. And I said, well, I want you to know that someone took the time to contact me and tell you how much they appreciate it. That's what we need all over this province. People just doing their job, but feeling good about it, feeling appreciated. Our province, you don't know how good it'll be. But it's not going to be from some premier coming in and thinking they have all the answers. It's going to be from a premier that wants to get the answers from people that know better than they do.
We thank you for participating today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to David Duplessis, the CEO of the St. John Region Chamber, for some closing comments.
Well, thank you, Krista. Thank you for the excellent job in moderating. Thank you as well, Premier Higgs, for participating in our political series. And thank you as well to all of the attendees that signed on, and thank you for your questions as well. I would like to comment, we're very, very pleased to see that you've addressed looking at things through the business lens, as Krista has mentioned as well. I would like to sort of give a shout out to the businesses of New Brunswick. We've heard lots of kudos for civil servants and people doing their job, but let's remember that the businesses that have been pivoting in our province have been doing a tremendous job of trying to keep the doors open too. So I would like to give a shout out to the businesses in our region and in our entire province that have pivoted and are still trying to survive. In closing, I'd like to thank as well my counterparts, Krista, John from Moncton, and Krista from Fredericton. Morgan, thanks for all your help, as Sylvan, Dylan as well. Thank you to the economic development agencies, Ron at Economic Development, Greater St. John, thank you as well, to Ignite Fredericton and 3+. I think it shows very well that as institutions and as organizations, we collaborate very, very well. And you know, I've heard a lot of talking about collaboration here today, and from some of the other presenters as well. I think that from the chamber perspective, we do very well at trying to speak with one voice, which is why we collaborate on so many issues and so many initiatives as well. So just in closing, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you again for participating. Thank you, Krista and John and Morgan and Sylvan, Dylan, for all of your hard work making this happen. And don't forget to get out and vote. Thank you so much. Have a great day.